We live in an unpredictable world where dogs are surrendered to animal shelters on a daily basis. But sometimes all it takes is one person to take a chance on them. And in Yuki, the shelter dog's case, it took two people to truly put the pieces together. When Kent and Nancy Smith picked up the dog, though, they realized that all was not as it seemed, and they ordered a DNA test for Yuki immediately. But before we start, smash the like button, subscribe, and ring the notifications bell so you never miss our upcoming stories. To truly understand this story, though, we need to know where it all began. And, sadly, Yuki the dog started off his life in a shelter. He spent day after day of his puppyhood waiting for a forever family to come and pick him up. And that day finally came in 2008, when his first owner officially opted him and took him home with him. Unfortunately, their first few weeks together weren't easy. Although Yuki's owner knew he'd adopted a large dog, he hadn't expected Yuki to be quite so tough and boisterous. He refused to listen to commands, and he was extremely reactive to humans. But that wasn't all. Yuki, the dog's owner, knew that it wouldn't be easy to bring a shelter dog home with him. However, he hadn't expected it to be quite so hard. He was being overpowered by Yuki in terms of his temperament, and the dog was just getting bigger and bigger by the day. And what he had originally thought looked like a husky or a German shepherd was beginning to look a little different. Of course, Yuki's owner hadn't expected the shelter dog to be as small as he was when he first adopted him, but he was growing at an exponential rate, and it was starting to scare him. By the time Yuki was just 8 months old, the puppy was bigger than his owner had ever imagined he would be, and he was still struggling with training. This meant that Yuki was pulling him over on walks, pushing him down when he got too excited, and overpowering him on every level. His owner was at his wit's end. He had wanted to do something nice by choosing adoption over a breeder, but was out of his depth. Because of this, his owner knew that he'd have to make a tough decision. He could either keep Yuki and potentially get injured in the process, or he could surrender him to someone who could take proper care of him. In the end, Yuki's adopter decided that it was in both of their best interests to surrender him to a shelter that would be able to give him the home he deserved. He needed experienced owners who were familiar with his breed and were capable of dealing with such a large and boisterous dog. But when he dropped Yuki off, the staff at the shelter were just as taken aback by the dog in front of them. Yuki was unlike any dog they had ever seen before. He was giant and stronger than any dog they had ever met. Because of this, they soon realized that they were out of their depth, too. In the end, the shelter decided to call in for reinforcements. They were familiar with another nearby shelter that focused on larger-than-life animals, and they knew that this shelter had experience working with giant dogs that needed a little more handling and training than others. They'd even heard that the owners had experience working with and caring for other wild animals, such as wild cougars and bobcats, so they knew they were the people to call. It wasn't long before Kent and Nancy Smith, the owners, received a phone call from the animal shelter that had taken Yuki in. And of course, when they heard his story, they were more than willing to help. But who are Kent and Nancy? Well, these Floridians have dedicated their whole lives to helping animals in need of extra love. And from their shelter, the Shy Wolf Sanctuary in Naples, they have taken care of over 1,200 animals to date. However, they have made sure that their shelter offers so much more than just a place for the animals to stay and live out their lives. They want their shelter to serve as an educational facility. In their eyes, humans need to understand more about wild animals to understand how we can all live in harmony with each other. So, they teach visitors about their animals on a daily basis. As soon as Kent and Nancy heard the news about Yuki, they knew that they needed to step in and help. So, they sent 2 of their staff members over to the shelter to bring Yuki back to them. And, in their minds, this was just going to be like any other day. They were so used to other shelters calling them and asking for help that they assumed their trip would continue like clockwork. However, that wasn't the case at all. As soon as the 2 staff members from the Shy Wolf Sanctuary set eyes on Yuki the dog, they knew they weren't dealing with a normal situation. They could see that he was terrified. He thrashed around at the sight of humans, he bared his teeth to warn them that he didn't want them to get close, and he seemed to constantly glare at them with his small, yellow eyes. On the one hand, they felt sorry for the animal. After all, it was clear to see that he was in distress. But on the other hand, they were a little terrified of him, too. He was so much larger than they had expected, and they guessed that he wasn't like any other dog they'd ever rescued before. The staff members were able to bundle Yuki the dog up and take him back to the Shy Wolf Sanctuary. It was here that Nancy and Kent met the 8-year-old dog for the first time, and they instantly knew by looking at him that there was something different about him. They sensed that he wasn't a normal dog, largely due to the fact that he was so much bigger than anything they'd seen before. Because of this, they needed to be sure they knew what they were dealing with. So, they decided to test Yuki's DNA before waiting impatiently for the results to arrive. While they waited for the results, they kept a close eye on the shelter dog. And while they were sure that Yuki's first owner had tried to train him, they could sense that he was the kind of dog that didn't want to be trained. He was scared of humans. Of course, the longer he spent at the Shy Wolf Sanctuary, they did notice a slight change in him. Although he seemed to become more comfortable around the staff as time wore on, an incident ultimately left them wondering if they'd even made the right decision by bringing Yuki back with them. Out of nowhere, Yuki, the dog, injured his knee. Sadly, this wasn't the kind of injury that could be healed with a little bit of bed rest and some painkillers. The shelter dog had to undergo 5 surgeries to correct the injury, and this seemed to set Yuki and the Shy Wolf Sanctuary back weeks. Although he had previously been fairly comfortable with the staff, he had suddenly become even more territorial. As he was feeling vulnerable, he was very specific about the humans he would let near him. As Yuki continued to recover from his injury and his multiple surgeries, the staff kept a close eye on him, even if those eyes were from afar. It was then that they realized Yuki wasn't particularly fond of men, and would react the most when men neared his cage. When they changed tact and only allowed female staff members near Yuki, they could see that the dog was so much calmer. Yuki was beginning to love the women at the sanctuary, and with some of the staff members, he was becoming more and more like a regular dog. They also continued to wait for the DNA test results to come their way. They were eager to understand more about Yuki the dog, as they knew that this was the key to truly understanding his behavior. And, more than anything, it would allow them to understand why he was just continuing to grow and grow. In fact, he was bigger than anything other dog they'd rescued before. And when the results finally arrived, they soon discovered that their suspicions were correct. Yuki wasn't a normal dog, and they finally had the proof they had been looking for. As Nancy and Kent read the results, they finally understood what was so unique about Yuki. While he did technically have dog DNA in the form of Siberian Husky and German Shepherd genes, the rest, a whopping 87% of his DNA, was Grey Wolf. With this information in tow, Kent and Nancy were able to clarify that Yuki was no longer Yuki the dog. Instead, he was Yuki the wolf dog, and suddenly, everything made sense. As the staff at Shy Wolf Sanctuary considered this information, they finally understood why Yuki's original owner was forced to give him up for adoption. Wolf dogs are rarely domesticated animals, and even those who try to domesticate them often fall at the first hurdle due to their antisocial nature and their distrust of humans. So, Yuki's original owner was fighting a losing battle he would never have won even if he tried for a number of years. Of course, this left the team in a very sticky situation. What were they to do with Yuki? Would they be able to domesticate him? Or would they have to send him elsewhere? After much thought and deliberation, the team at the Shy Wolf Sanctuary decided to give Yuki the wolf dog a chance. He had spent his whole life in a situation he had never been comfortable with, and they wondered whether, in the right location and with the right research, they would be able to domesticate him slightly. After all, it is possible to domesticate wolf dogs, but the chances are pretty slim most of the time. Despite the potential for failure, the team worked hard to give Yuki the space he needed. They let him roam free in their amazing facility, while also checking in on him to prove that humans aren't all bad. After a few weeks, they could really see that their hard work was starting to pay off. Although Yuki loved the chance to roam free like the wolf dog he was also becoming more and more comfortable with the humans who worked at the shelter. And despite the fact that he weighted a whopping 120 pounds and was over 5 feet long, he still loved to sit on the laps of his favorite female humans. In fact, he had become part of the family at the Shy Wolf Sanctuary. And while he hadn't been fully domesticated, he seemed to be the perfect fit with the other animals that called that place home. Although Yuki had spent a large portion of his life being misunderstood, the Shy Wolf Sanctuary gave him the chance to be himself, and the staff loved him for that. In fact, they loved him so much that they decided to share his story on their social media channels. They kept their friends and followers up to date on the comings and goings of the wolf dog, and fans quickly fell in love with him too. He even became a social media icon. He had dedicated fans who wanted to know anything and everything about the wolf dog, and this even spawned his own line of merchandise. For the most part, Yuki the wolf dog loved his female humans, and it seems as though they're not the only females he loved. After a few months at the Shy Wolf Sanctuary, Yuki found a mate in the form of Bella. These two wolf dogs were like two peas in a pod, following each other everywhere, and even finding fame as a social media duo. All in all, Yuki seemed to be living the good life. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end, and after a few years, the Shy Wolf Sanctuary was given some news that hit them like a bow to the heart. In November 2020, the sanctuary learned that their beloved Yuki the wolf dog had cancer. The diagnosis came as a shock to them, as Yuki had always been so healthy and happy. But while they were sad to learn that he ultimately wouldn't make it, they were happy that they had taken a chance on him and given him a good life during his final days. In the end, Yuki passed away, surrounded by the staff members who had cared and loved him for so many years. It was a tough pill to swallow, but one that ultimately had positive repercussions. After caring for Yuki for so many years, Kent and Nancy had been inspired. As they mourned the loss of their beloved wolf dog, they began to question the wolf dog breed as a whole. So, they made the decision to buy more land in Florida to help even more wolf dogs in need, while also educating the wider community about the breed. They felt it was their purpose, and they knew they had to help. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and ring the notifications bell so you never miss amazing tales like this one.